This is Wrestling with Wrestling's Past and Present. I'm Tim Kirk.
And I'm Roland Fulis.
And today it is all about Bray Wyatt. It is part 2 of our discussion, continuing off where we left off from last week.
Part 2.
Yes. And we left off right around Survivor Series 2016, so that brings us to about November 2016.
Yeah, we covered all the early Husky Harris stuff, little brief history on his personal career, and all the way up to 2016. Here we go.
All right, here we go. So we're starting things off. Like I said, we're going to talk about Survivor Series 2016. Bray Wyatt, along with Randy Orton, they were the survivors for Team SmackDown in the traditional Survivor Series elimination match. And this happened after Orton saved Wyatt from a spear from Roman Reigns.
Yeah, I believe he pushed him out of the way, took the spear, I think, if I remember correctly. Orton ended up taking the spear, and then Wyatt ended up pinning him, I think, right? Is that how that went?
I'm not 100% sure, but we'll go with that.
I feel like that's what happened. But, I mean, why else would they say that, he saved him?
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's my thought, but, maybe, could be wrong.
So then after Survivor Series, Orton and Wyatt would start focusing on the tag team titles, the SmackDown tag team titles. At the time, they're being held by American Alpha.
That's Shorty G, Chad Gable at the time, and his partner Jason Jordan, who was allegedly Kurt Angle's son.
Yes.
For those of you that don't remember that horrible bit of business.
Yeah, I actually misspoke. The titles were held by Heath Slater and Rhino. American Alpha was the contention for the number one contendership. So they actually defeated American Alpha to become the number one contenders for the tag team titles. And at TLC, which happened in December, they actually did win titles from Rhino and Heath Slater. And they would actually defend these under the Freebird rule, so any member of the Wyatt family could defend the tag team titles at any one time.
For those of you that don't know, the Freebird rule essentially is any group of 3 that they made the rule so any of the 2 could defend the titles for the Freebirds back in the day. So that's why it was called the Freebird rule. So the New Day used to use that when there were still 3 of them. I mean, Xavier Woods is out hurt right now. So that's the most recent example of the Freebird rule. But it's pretty much so anybody in the group can defend the titles at any time. It's not just 2 people. You can pick the 2 that you want in the match.
I believe the New Day kind of utilizes this rule too today as well.
I believe that's what I just said. Apparently, Tim doesn't listen to anything I say while I'm talking. But yeah, that's what I just said. Xavier Woods being out and stuff. But yeah, so yeah, he's right. Anyways, about the Freebird rule.
It's lunchtime. I haven't had lunch yet. All right, moving on. They would only hold the title for a few weeks. They would lose them to American Alpha on December 27th, and this kind of started some disconnect between Harper and
between Harper and Orton.
In Orton, yes.
From the beginning, Harper was not set on Orton being in the group anyways. Mm-hmm. He always thought he had ulterior motives and was going to turn on Wyatt and obviously Harper. So Harper was always really cautious of Orton to begin with. Yep. And that's where that storyline kind of went. Yep,
and Wyatt would eventually hit the sister Abigail to Harper, and that kind of exiled him from the group.
Yeah, he picked Orton over Harper, which, I mean, if I had to pick, I'd pick Orton over Harper too.
This leads us up to the Royal Rumble in January of 2017 now. Wyatt entered the Royal Rumble at number 21. He would last the final 3, but Randy Orton would ultimately win that match and get a title shot at WrestleMania. So moving on, the next pay-per-view would be the Elimination Chamber, and this is kind of where Wyatt would kind of emerge as a top player for WWE. He would win the WWE Championship in an Elimination Chamber match. The other contestants involved were Baron Corbin, Dean Ambrose, AJ Styles, The Miz, and John Cena.
That's a pretty good list of characters there.
That's a good match. Yeah, that was a very good caliber match right there. So this was the first singles title in Wyatt's career, and obviously his first world title. Okay, and so he would go on to defend his championship in the next coming weeks against people, including a threat match with John Cena and AJ Styles. Orton, at this time, though, the storyline was he pledged allegiance to Wyatt and said that he would refuse to face him at WrestleMania. Because, as you remember, Orton does have the title match coming to him.
Right, so, I mean, they set this up pretty well for having Wyatt choose Orton, and then Orton wins the Rumble, and then the next month they put the title on Wyatt. So look where they're going. They're going Wyatt and Orton. Mm-hmm. Orton pledges his alliance to Bray Wyatt, saying that he's not going to face him, and knowing Randy Orton for being the Viper, I don't know where this is going to go, but where'd that end up going?
Well, it ended up being it wasn't.
It was a clever charade.
Yes,
I think it was.
That's a good way to put it, because Orton would end up destroying the family compound, the Wyatt family compound, just a couple weeks later.
And in case you don't know, in the real world, it's known as arson.
Yes.
But on WWE TV, you can burn someone's house down.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's fine. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah, you can get a lot of stuff in the WWE.
But yeah, they had that. That was actually a pretty neat angle, too, the way they went with it. They showed Orton's real diabolical dark side, trying to match up to Wyatt's dark cult leader figure-y, person. So it was a nice way to elevate Orton to that level. Not that he needed help, but it brought him to that same level to show everybody how diabolical he could be against someone like Bray Wyatt.
So at WrestleMania, Orton would defeat Wyatt for the title. Wyatt's reign ended up just being under 50 days, 49 days. And then after WrestleMania, Wyatt was moved to Raw as part of the Superstar Shakeup. And he was originally supposed to have a title match at Payback in a House of Horrors match, but it was changed to a non-title match instead. And Wyatt would end up defeating Orton after being helped by Jinder Mahal.
Jinder Mahal, of all people.
Yes.
Wow. Where's Jinder Mahal now, anyways?
I believe he's injured. I think he's almost on his way back, though.
I know he hasn't been on TV for a while.
Yeah.
We talked about Heath Slater a little while ago. That's 2/3 of 3MB.
3MB.
For those people.
Three-man band.
For the people that remember that from a few years back.
Drew McIntyre being the third person in that band.
Easily the most successful of the three, I think. No offense to Mahal or Slater. I think McIntyre is going to be the guy to come out of that group the most successful, I think.
No, I agree. Although Mahal did win the WWE title.
That's true. That's very. I think it's sad to think that Slater might be one of the better workers.
Yeah.
He really, other than being a tag team champion with Rhino, really hasn't done much.
He hasn't done much.
But anyways, back to where we're at. A little sidebar there, but
all right. So we're gonna fast forward a little bit to June. Bray Wyatt at Extreme Rules was in a match, Fatal 5 match for the #1 contendership for the Universal title, but he did not win. Samoa Joe ended up winning that match. Bray Wyatt then began going after Seth Rollins after Seth Rollins was unveiled as the cover of WWE 2K18, and he defeated Seth Rollins at the worst named pay-per-view of all time, Great Balls of Fire, and that happened in July.
I feel like we brought that up in a previous podcast.
Yes,
too.
I will always bring it up every time.
That was a bad one. They literally just grasping at straws. They're like, oh, there's a song called Great Balls of Fire, so we'll just name the pay-per-view that, and boom, we have a song for the pay-per-view.
Just fair warning, every time that pay-per-view comes up, I will always reference it as the worst named pay-per-view.
It's easily in the top 3. Off the top of my head, it's hard to think of anyone's worse than that.
Yes.
But yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah. So after that, he entered into a feud with Finn Balor. This would lead us up to SummerSlam. And Balor, in his Demon King gimmick, would defeat Wyatt at SummerSlam. And then Wyatt would lose to Balor again at No Mercy the following month. I believe that was Finn Balor, just as he wasn't the Demon King, I don't believe.
It was just Finn Balor,
It was just Finn Balor.
And this is kind of like we were talking about on part 1. This is where Wyatt lost like every match on pay-per-view for the longest time. He after he won the title and then lost the title, he didn't win a match on pay-per-view forever, it felt like.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. It felt like he never would win on pay-per-view. All right. So he was originally scheduled to face Finn Balor at the that year, but he had an illness and had to be replaced. I believe that was Roman Reigns was supposed to compete too, and he had an illness, and that's where they brought in Kurt Angle for them. I think they had there was something going around in the locker room.
Yes. Yeah, I remember they had a rash of something that hit people, and yeah, I remember there was some big names that missed shows because of it.
So Wyatt would end up returning on November 13th. That was an episode of Raw. He would lose to Jason Jordan, and that kind of stands out a little bit that he would lose to Jason Jordan.
Well, I mean, at that point, was he Kurt Angle's son yet?
I think he had to be, yeah. So maybe.
That, like I said, horrible gimmick there too.
They're
going to make Jason Jordan Kurt because they're both bald and they both were in the Olympics. Apparently, he could have been his son.
Oh man. So then he started a feud with Matt Hardy after defeating him in a match, and this kind of resulted in Matt Hardy's Woken gimmick.
Yeah, they took the broken gimmick that he had achieved good success with when he was in Impact, and they rehashed it. And of course, WWE has to have their intellectual property, so it had to be the woken Matt Hardy, not broken Matt Hardy.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember originally they couldn't use it because technically Impact had the rights to it. I remember when the Hardys first came back, there was a lot of talk about why wasn't Matt, broken Matt Hardy, because when they came back to the WWE from Impact, he was that character. When he came back with Jeff. He was the Hardy Boys again, but he was still doing the delete chants and stuff. But they wanted to make sure they weren't going to get any legal trouble for using something that they didn't own. Mm-hmm. And I remember they had to get into that. So I think it was a good way to introduce this character too, to have, obviously it makes sense to have Wyatt, who's obviously a little off in the head, to have, go with Matt Hardy, who's now newly woken.
Absolutely. So during the Raw 25th anniversary show in January 2018, Wyatt would defeat Matt Hardy once again. Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt would eliminate each other in the Royal Rumble match that ended that month. And at Elimination Chamber, Hardy defeated Wyatt in a singles match. And then on March 19th, that was an episode of Raw, Hardy defeated Wyatt in an ultimate deletion match with the mower of lawn assisting. In that match, Hardy pushed Wyatt into the Lake of Reincarnation, and where Wyatt just mysteriously disappeared, and we did not know what was going on with Bray Wyatt at that time.
Like we said earlier, you had arson, now you have a drowning. They just name it disappeared. He pushes him in a lake, and he's just gone.
He's gone. Oh, man. And Wyatt would return at WrestleMania 34, and he actually returned as a face because he if interfered in the Andre the Giant Battle Royal, helping Hardy win.
Mind you, he came back reincarnated as a face.
Yes.
So clearly it worked.
It did work.
Clearly the Lake of Reincarnation was the way to go.
So if you want to change yourself, if you're not happy with who you are right now and want to change some things about yourself, just go to the Lake of Incarnation and just disappear for a few weeks.
Which I believe is in the House Hardy compound somewhere there.
Yep.
So yeah,
in North Carolina somewhere.
I was just Cameron, North Carolina. I would think probably. Yep. Find that, hop in, and boom, new character.
You'll be good. You'll be good to go. They would form a tag team and would eventually win the Raw tag team titles. That happened in April.
They went under the name of the Deleters of Worlds.
The
Deleters of Worlds, which I thought was a really cool way to tie it together.
Yeah, I did so.
Hardy was, the whole delete gimmick as woken Matt Hardy, and Bray Wyatt always said he was the Eater of Worlds, so they kind of meshed it together, and it was a pretty neat name for the two, I thought.
So, just as a quick note, they won the Raw Tag Team titles from Cesaro and Sheamus at the Greatest Royal Rumble event. They would lose the titles to the B Team.
Oh, boy.
The B Team. Bo Dallas.
There's Brother Bo again.
Yep. Bo Dallas and Curtis Axel.
Joe Henning and Taylor Rotunda, in case we're keeping track for anybody.
That happened at Extreme Rules in July. So every title that Bray Wyatt's won, he has not held it very long, just a few weeks, and then he would lose it to somebody else.
And it seems to be very underwhelming when he loses it.
Yeah.
It's just like, whatever. The Orton thing, at least that made it made sense in that whole storyline the way that went.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you know, lose to the B team, like I don't know. Sometimes I just don't know.
July 23rd, they were not successful in their title rematch against the B team, and after that, Hardy took some time off, so that kind of disabled the tag team at that point. And Bray Wyatt would return for a one-off on November 25th at the Starrcade event, which was kind of a glorified house show that WWE put on, incarnating the event from WCW. And he defeated Baron Corbin in a no disqualification match.
Yeah, and then, I mean, and that was the end of November. And then we don't see Bray Wyatt again until April. So he takes about a 6-month, span of going off TV for a while. There was a lot of times during that where you heard rumors he might pop back up, but he never did. And then I don't know what we're going to cover here, what he did.
Yeah.
It was definitely interesting.
It was definitely interesting. So if you remember, in April, they started showing what they call vignettes, and it had like the puppet, this witch doll, and just various other toys, and it was very creepy vignettes appearing on television. And
we never really saw Bray Wyatt or anything, so nobody really knew exactly what it was for.
Yeah,
we had ideas. We were wondering what it was going to be,
what they're doing, where they're going with this.
Yep.
And we would kind of find out a little bit on April 22nd and 23rd on episodes of Raw and SmackDown. Wyatt appeared in this kind of a play on a children's program called the Firefly Funhouse, which is still going on today. It's kind of this creepy, demonic children's show segment.
I mean, almost like Bray Wyatt as Mr. Rogers.
A creepy Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, I mean, taking Bray Wyatt's character and trying to be Mr. Rogers. I think, is kind of how that goes.
Yeah.
And they had, they had the puppets in there. They had Mercy the Buzzard, and then they had Abby the Witch. Mm-hmm. They had Ramblin' Rabbit, who's been killed like 7 times now, if you're keeping track. And then also, you have the Vince McMahon character, the boss. And then you have Huskus, which I think has to be a play on Husky Harris, if you're asking me. That's what I think that's from. And then Mercy is a play on Waylon Mercy, who was a character that Wyatt originally used when he made his first appearance as Wyatt, as Bray Wyatt. He used that character, Waylon Mercy, as someone to kind of get inspiration from.
Yes, Waylon Mercy was a wrestler back in the 90s.
So that's why, and Sister Abigail, Abby the Witch. So they all have meaning. I don't really know what the rabbit honestly has anything to do with, really, but the other characters all at least have some sort of inside meaning as to what their names are and why they were named what they were named.
And we should also mention that his look kind of changed a little bit here too. He had shorter, a little bit different hair. Shorter. He was actually a little bit leaner too.
Yeah, he actually looked really. I mean, since he's come back from his time off there, that 6 months, he looks in probably the best shape he's been in his career.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
He used to be, even when he came back from being Husky Harris, when he first came back as Wyatt, he was still bigger. He wasn't really as fat as he was with when he was Husky Harris, so he had gotten into better shape, but he's in even better shape now than he was then.
So, over the course of the week, the segments would just become more and more kind of creepy and evil, I guess. And then there was one where he was having a picnic with these kids that had no emotion whatsoever.
Yeah, the kids just kind of stared off into.
off.
It was the first segment of the Firefly Funhouse. He said that he knew, what he had to do and what he was, and he'd become somebody else, and he had to destroy his past essentially. So he took a chainsaw and he cut a cardboard cutout of what he used to look like, in the segment. And that was his thing of him becoming, not letting his old character come back and ruin what he had changed in his life, or his character anyways.
Probably one of the more significant episodes, though, is the one where he said that he had a secret. He was able to control his darkness and his aggression, but he also had this persona called the Fiend, which would be when he wants to release that aggression in that his sinister kind of emotions.
And it's funny too, because for the longest time, you didn't really know where they were going with these characters, if they were going to be one person, that kind of had split personalities. But I mean, right now, they're kind of playing them like they're two different people.
Yeah.
Like you have I mean, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but recently you had Bray Wyatt defend the title against the Miz. Well, not defend the title, but face the Miz but he had his own title, and the Fiend supposedly has that other made up title, and he defended it the pay-per-view before against Daniel Bryan as the Fiend. So it's weird, and like I said, I'm skipping ahead a little, but it's weird to think that they're trying to make this character into literally two different people. Like they never are seen in the same place. I mean, obviously it's the same person, I get that, but they're never, even on TV, you could have them communicate with each other, but they're never in the same place at the same time. It's always one or the other. And when Wyatt talks about the Fiend, he says he. He doesn't say me. He says he. Yep. So you saw that in that first vignette, or that first when he said he had the that he could control it. You could see that they were going to go a little bit darker with that character. We didn't know how dark. It turns out it's probably the darkest character he's had yet.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely agree. So July 15th, again, we're in 2019, he would return as the Fiend, and he performed Sister Abigail on Finn Balor. And then at SummerSlam, he just defeated him in minutes. And he would start using the Mandible Claw, and he would attack legends like Kurt Angle, Jerry Lawler, Kane, Mick Foley. And in subsequent Firefly Funhouses, you would see their pictures, like red X's, like on their eyes.
Yeah, and it was interesting because one of the first legends he did attack was Mick Foley. And that's when that was the first time he used the Mandible Claw, and ever since then he's been using it.
Yeah.
And obviously some of that is, with the legends, you don't really want to hurt them. So at least that way you can still make it look like you're doing something to them without, having one of them get twisted up and Sister Abigail and get hurt. So it's a good way to show aggression without having to hurt them, but it's still a very, it's on your eyes, you can see what he's doing. It's believable.
To me, it fits the character really
very
well.
Demonic. Supposedly you're getting the gullet and you're pushing and so like it's definitely a Mankind started that, obviously Mick Foley, the character Mankind, and he was kind of that dark character that used the Mandible Claw, so it definitely fits. I agree. I totally agree.
At Clash of Champions, the Fiend would show up again and attack Seth Rollins. This happened after Seth Rollins defeated Braun Strowman for the Universal title. They would face each other at Hell in the Cell in a Hell in the Cell match, but this was one of the more controversial finishes that we've had in a long time. The referee would stop the match. Granted, this is a Hell in the Cell match. Rollins used a sledgehammer on the Fiend, and he was buried under a bunch of things like a chair, tools, a ladder, a toolbox.
During that match, Rollins couldn't keep the Fiend down.
No.
So you see, he took 10 stomps, or he just repeatedly was stomping him, trying to keep him down. And at one point, I think like the second stomp he gave him, he stomped him, and then as he spun around, Wyatt was already standing back up.
Yeah.
So the Fiend was already back at his feet. So that was where they were going with that. And to quote, recently in the news, JR had said, Jim Ross had said about the, I don't know, we're going to go a little off topic here, but the AEW spot with the Dark Order, he had quoted it saying the punches that the guy was throwing to Dustin Rhodes, where he wasn't even hitting him, and you could see it in the camera, like how bad they were, that it was quote unquote the drizzling shits. That's what this finish was. This finish was horrible. How do you stop a no holds barred, anything goes, Hell in the Cell match and just call it a no contest?
Yeah.
Like I mean, unless somebody is really physically hurt, like to the point where, even Mick Foley went through the cage, got thrown off the damn thing, and that match kept going.
I know.
That match didn't stop. So it was very interesting, and everybody there, the fans were chanting, the BS chant for a while, and they were not happy either, which I don't blame them, because when the Fiend wrestles, they have that red lighting too, so it can't be very easy for people further back to see it either. Yeah, because it's hard to see it on TV. So they were already probably struggling to see it, and then to see the match end and the pay-per-view to end that way, it would have pissed me off too.
I agree. I mean, it was bad. It made no sense whatsoever. They kind of tried to rectify the situation at Crown Jewel where they were going to face each other in a Falls Count Anywhere match. It was under the stipulation that the match could not be stopped for any reason whatsoever.
Even if there was a toolbox and a sledgehammer and all this stuff, it couldn't be stopped.
Couldn't be stopped for any reason.
So it was under Hell in the Cell rules.
Yes, pretty much.
So yeah, I don't know.
And Bray Wyatt would defeat Seth Rollins and therefore win the Universal title.
I will say that was probably one of the more iconic pictures in recent memory of when Wyatt went off the stage through the production stuff and all the sparks go flying and everything. When Seth Rollins comes around to one of the boxes, lifts it up, and the sparks fly, and Rollins spins around, and he's, oh, my eye, and then you see the Fiend stand up behind him. Yeah. That image was probably one of the coolest camera shots they've had in a long time. Because you're like, holy crap, this guy is not only okay, but he's now literally standing behind Seth Rollins after taking that bump.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely, to me, it was one of those ones where like you see him pop up and you're like, oh, you have that moment of like, wow, this is cool. So they definitely rectified it by having it the way that it played out to try to make up for that horrible Hell in the Cell match.
So Bray Wyatt eventually became a member of the SmackDown brand, so the Universal title now belongs to SmackDown. And as we said earlier, he introduced two belts. One was kind of a blue version of the Universal belt, and the other was the Fiend-themed Universal title belt as well. And let's see. So then Wyatt began a feud with Daniel Bryan, defeating him at Survivor Series. And then he would attack Bryan and rip out his hair and drag him under the ring on an episode of SmackDown.
And that was on an episode of the SmackDown. That was after the pay-per-view, after he had lost, and they were questioning what Daniel Bryan was going to do next.
Yep.
He didn't know, what was next for him and everything else, and that, he was trying to distance himself from the Fiend, it seemed like. But then the Fiend, kind of, this is the way of dragging him back into the storyline. So it's really good storytelling here, as opposed to the, again, horrible Hell in the Cell.
Horrible. So. And obviously, Daniel Bryan would return with, he cut his beard and he cut his hair.
Back to the American Dragon gimmick, essentially the look when he came into WWE many years ago. He looks pretty... I don't think he's aged either. Like,
no.
You look at him from 10 years ago, he looks like the same person now without the hair and the beard.
And then, as we mentioned, too, Bray Wyatt, not the Fiend, would defeat The Miz at TLC. That was kind of a weird match because Miz basically dominated the offense, but Bray Wyatt would win just after a couple quick moves and a Sister Abigail.
Yeah, because during the match, Bray Wyatt was almost letting The Miz hit him. Like, he was, like, trying to, I don't want to fight you. I'm, trying to play the defensive, I'm the... like a martyr almost. Like, I don't want to be, hit. You don't need to hit. Like, we don't have to do this. We can be friends. Kind of thing. And it was really weird because the leading up to that, you see the picture that the Miz had with Wyatt over the picture of his family, and Bray Wyatt was the one that delivered the Sister Abigail after that. But yet during the match, he didn't want to face him. It was really weird. It was weird. A weird setup for the match. I get it, but it was definitely kind of eerie and weird to see the way they went about it. True. But that was also to make, I think, a play on the fact that Daniel Bryan was still with the Fiend. Yeah, that was part of the thing too, is that the Fiend took Daniel Bryan, and that he was still with him, and that was what Bray Wyatt was saying to the Miz during things that that the Fiend he wasn't done with Daniel Bryan yet.
Yep, and he is not. He's about to face him. At the Royal Rumble.
Right, well, and that was when he returned, was at the end, comes through the crowd wearing the hood and everything else, and that's what I feel like it was filler, but it was good filler. It made sense, like, the Fiend's gone. He's dealing with Daniel Bryan. He took him, he's gone, yep. And it's almost like Daniel Bryan escaped and came back. And so definitely a neat story to include The Miz. And The Miz obviously has a history with Daniel Bryan, so it kind of made sense anyways.
Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of wraps things up. That kind of brings us to present day. I'm really excited. I think they're going to keep the belt on him for a really long time. He's not going to be one that he's not going to defend it all the time.
Right, which is nice. I mean, you already have the other champion on the other show not defending his title ever.
And I think this will be different though, because I think he'll be on television.
Right. It makes it special in a different way versus just not having the guy there.
I think I think they're booking him really well right now. They're not forcing him down our throats. They're kind of going a little slow with him. You're only seeing him wrestle every so often, but it's enough. It's enough to get the storyline across, and it does captivate you.
Yeah, and you can only really count on one hand how many times you've actually seen the Fiend wrestle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's the nice thing, because every time you see Bray Wyatt, it's Bray Wyatt.
Sure.
It's not the Fiend.
It's not the Fiend.
Which makes it feel special in a way when he does wrestle. So they creative, whoever's spearheading this angle, whoever it is in WWE creative, is doing a hell of a job with it.
Absolutely.
I know Richard is in charge of SmackDown. I don't know how much he has to do with that, but I mean, whoever the one is spearheading this whole angle and keeping it the way it is doing great. I think this is probably the best angle they've had on WWE TV in years, easily.
Absolutely, I agree. And one of the best characters.
Yes,
definitely.
easily. Yep.
All right, well, that wraps up this episode all about Bray Wyatt. We will be back next week with a brand new episode for you guys. Until then, I'm Tim Kurt.
And I'm Roland Fulis.
And this has been Wrestling with Wrestling's Past and Present.